there it's up. Hi. So you're all mic. What were you reaching for?
I was going to say the screen's there.
Oh, what do you know? OK,
Yeah.
cool. So hello, everybody. My name is Nicholas Matsakis.
I'm Jack Huey.
This is Jack. I'm the co-lead of the Rust language design team. Been working on Rust for a long time. Also a senior principal engineer at Amazon.
I co-lead the types team, Lang advisor, compiler member, been a part of the Rust project since 2019. Not a senior principal engineer at Amazon. But I enjoy working on Rust and want to share with you today some of the things that we've been working on for the last few months.
Let's see if this works. Woohoo! All right. So why are we here? Well, we're here because we have a problem, and it's a pretty good one. Our problem is that Microsoft is giving talks where they say, hey, we're all in on Rust. And there's tons of Rust usage at Amazon, and basically there's usage at Google, and Rust adoption is really picking up, right? And the reason that's a problem is it used to be that it was not that hard to decide what to do next. It was kind of hard, but it was easier because we could say, hey, if we're going to unblock these users, that's a good thing. We want Rust adoption. That's something we need to survive. We're going to focus ourselves on that. But as we find getting more and more success, we're starting to think a little harder. Like, what is Rust's mission in the world? I mean, are we just here to make every single program be written in Rust? Like, OK, maybe, but not. Hopefully not, right? We want to find where Rust really adds value and double down on that and leave space for other people to do other things that will be awesome in their own right.
Yeah, so if you go to the website and you look at the motto today, it's a language empowering everyone to build reliable and efficient software. And I think the loaded words here are empowering everyone, right? And the big question is, what does this mean? What does it mean to empower, and who is everyone, right? Is it every program in the world? I don't know. You think so?
I mean, the way I think about it is empowering, right, is something that you couldn't do before, or which was impractical for you to do before, making that accessible, making that something you can do, right? And so in order to figure out where we can really empower people, we have to actually know what it is, the things that they're trying to do, and which ones they're finding difficult, which ones are already easy, right? And that might be with Rust, but it might also be with other languages. Like, I don't think particularly want to solve problems that are already solved. We want to solve the problems that are really struggling, that people are having a hard time with, right? I mean, that means we have to understand their challenges and know what's working and what's not.
I mean, Nico, I know what the challenges with Rust are, right? I mean, I'm a Rust dev.
It's true. And I like to think that I can just trust my own instincts and know everything about what every Rust user's experience will be based on what I find hard. But sometimes I find I'm a little narrow. It's better if we can talk to people.
But we do, right? I mean, there's the RFCs and Zulip and GitHub.
That's true. So we do get a lot of user input from Zulip, from RFCs. But it turns out, well, let me ask you this. How many of you are leaving comments on Zulip on a regular basis? Some. How many are commenting on RFCs on a regular basis? Even fewer, which is interesting. Yeah. So, so it turns out those forums that we have for collecting user input, they were great when, well, I don't know how many remember the Rust dev mailing list. I do. Yeah, see? They were good in the olden days when the scale was small, but they're not so good now. There's a bunch of people out there who we don't have a real venue for talking to and learning from. Right? And so that's what we're hoping the Rust Vision Doc will close.
And to do this, we need to use a technique called qualitative research. And there's basically 2 points to this, right? So first is we don't want to introduce biases, right? We don't want to look at an octopus and think it has claws. And second, we don't want to...
It's a stretched metaphor, I'm just telling you.
Yeah, well. And second, we don't want to think about people's opinions. We want to think about experiences and hear that from them. So it doesn't matter if you think this dress is black and blue.
That dress is, yeah. So I don't know about the rest of you, but that dress is definitely gold.
But ultimately, when we hear about these experiences, we want to take them at face value and work towards a better experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think the short version of qualitative research is talk to people, but it's actually more than that, right? It's more subtle. So
there's three parts of qualitative research. So there's the gathering data, which is talking to people and listening to them. There's making conclusions, and then there's testing those conclusions. And we're, as part of the vision doc work, somewhere in the middle of gathering data and making conclusions.
And I should say the we here is me, it is Jack, but it's also Pete, sitting right here in the front corner, Ernest, wherever he is, connecting people and making people happy, and Tim McNamara has done a lot of work. I think that's the core folks who've been involved and done the most work on the team. But it's definitely a group effort, right? So the way we approach this, we started out with our gathering data as we kind of did it in two phases. Some of you may have seen, we started out with a survey that we put on the Rust blog, just to get a broad view of what's all the things people say. And in the survey, we asked some demographic questions, some free form questions where people can tell us like what they love about Rust and so on. And our goal here was, well, in the third section, which was contact information, right? And our goal was simultaneously to get a bunch of people we could talk to, and just to make sure that we weren't going to find that there's some theme that we would never have thought to ask about that shows up surprisingly often in the survey. So kind of a first pass. And then we started doing detailed 45-minute interviews. What comes next? All right, so now we're at the phase where we've gathered this data, and we're starting to do what's called coding.
Nico, I do coding all the time.
It's not the kind of coding that I like to do most of the time, but it's like reading through the data, finding themes, and so on, right?
Yeah, and then we're going to make some blindingly brilliant insight.
Yeah, that's our goal. So what did we get in our survey? We got 5,499 responses.
Which, to be honest, is a lot more than I expected.
We thought we would get like 100, or I don't know. We didn't think we would get this many. It's a lot. And we got them from all over the globe, mostly the US and the EU, but also significant numbers from Asia and Africa, Latam. We got them from people using all kinds of programming languages. That is to say, we asked, if you weren't using Rust, what language would you be using? Something like that. Or what languages have you used before? And we also got them working in many different domains, like async to embedded, and shockingly, CLIs. Like everybody writes CLIs. That's what I learned from this. 70-some%, I don't know. Some huge percentage of people write CLIs in Rust.
And really, there are two notable gaps in our survey. So first, were people that use Go were actually kind of underrepresented in our survey, I think, compared to what we would expect.
Yeah, we basically had almost no respondents who said they would use Go, which is interesting.
Take with that what you will. And then the second group were beginners, right? So unsurprisingly, when you put out a survey to people that follow Rust things, they tend to also be good at Rust. And so if you look at the people that responded and how comfortable they are, very few say they're not very comfortable. And if you look at the people that say, yeah, and you can contact me for an interview, even fewer will say that.
Yeah, so we highlight this to point out that we don't just talk to people who responded on the survey, right? If we did that, we would surely not have a good representative sample. So we're using this to get some number of people, and especially to get out of our local networks and our friends and our people we would talk to anyway. But we're also looking specifically at gaps like these and saying, how can we reach out to like people who use Go or people who don't know Rust that well and try to cover those gaps?
So the interviews, right? So we've done about 65 interviews so far, which sounds like a lot, and maybe it is, but it's also maybe not enough, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Each interview is about 45 minutes. Some go a little bit longer, some are a little bit shorter. And for each one, we've kept the recordings and the transcripts, but we keep them private. And these are especially important for going back later and thinking about when somebody says something, exactly what they say. And we have some quotes later that we use these to talk about.
Right. So the way you do this kind of research normally is you try to keep going until you're hearing the same things over and over and over again. Right? And that means you've kind of saturated the space. And we're starting to approach that in some areas, but we still feel like there's some gaps where we would like to get more details. And the other part is you're not looking to gain. We only talked to 65 people, so we can't, like it's a lot on one hand and it's very few in another. It's not like we have a representative sample of all of Rustland. So we're looking for the space of things that could be true, not necessarily how often they are true, right? That you have to assess in other ways.
So what does an interview look like? And it all comes back to qualitative research, right? So we don't want to introduce biases, and we want to talk about experiences, not opinions. And so we don't want to ask, so what do you love about Rust? Because there's a lot of connotations with that, right? So instead, we ask questions like, when the last time you used Rust, what did you feel? What was your experience? And this gives us very concrete experiences that we can go back and compare with other interviews.
Yeah, I've been doing it everywhere. There's a few poor people at the sponsor booths where I've been just going up to them and I'm like, so, when was the last time Rust made you happy? You'll raise your hand, you know you're out there somewhere. But it's an interesting experience. It's really cool. It takes practice to do the interview in this style. And the first few I read back and I realize, I was really like leading the witness. I was kind of telling them what to say. Yeah. You have to try to work against that.
And yeah, a big thing is the interviews are very much led by the person we're being interviewed, right? We don't ask the questions with some expectation of what we're going to hear. We sort of take the interview where they take us.
Yeah. So where did they take us? Well, we're going to give you some quotes that we thought were representative and interesting, starting with one of the first big themes, which was like people's journey into Rust. How did they get started using Rust? Right? And one of the big themes, the one that's come up a lot, which is very gratifying given how we started, is this sort of empowerment theme. Right? It's people who had come in, not necessarily been doing, or had not been doing low-level development or high scale or efficiency or reliability, but more like, in this case, say, a civil engineering background, and then learning Python and seeing that there was this kind of scary area of, ooh, those must be real wizards doing that stuff, and the Rust gave them a way into that, right? And that's super cool. That's like the best thing. And the other thing we've noticed, not totally shocking, is that word of mouth is super important. And whether you're a JavaScript developer or a C++ developer, like people are listening to what other people are using, what other people are saying, and taking their cues and getting excited based on that. And the last thing, which I thought was interesting, is we're starting to talk to some people who wouldn't have used Rust at all, except that when they went to their job, they were like, that's the language you use here. And I like this. This is my favorite. Right? We're just going to force them to use Rust. No, it's good. No, but I mean, this is a sign. This is what they call crossing the chasm. It's a sign that we're moving into these spaces of people who just want to get their job done, and Rust happens to be the best tool for the job, right?
And so once people are using Rust, what is it that they love?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Tell
So,
me.
well, maybe unsurprising or surprising, what we hear is actually what people expect, right? So the first thing is reliability, right? People love that they can write something, and when they compile it, it runs mostly without issue.
I think what struck me here was not that people talked about reliability, but how much they talked about it.
Yeah.
Like everybody talks about it. It's good.
Second is they love the tools, not just that the Rust project puts out, like Cargo, but things that the ecosystem puts out, like Cargo Symbol checks. It ultimately leads to a polished experience, and people love that.
Yeah, I think that's like, it's kind of like when I use a Mac. I really expect the third-party software is really high quality compared to some other things. And the same, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that. It's true, though. They set a good tone. But in the same way, like Rust utilities, Rust CLIs have really nice polished interfaces, and people see that showing up. The error messages look cool. They underline things. It makes a difference.
And then finally, people say that Rust lets them go from the low level to the high level. And actually, you've seen this at the conference. So yesterday, Jonathan Kelly talked about high-level Rust and application development Rust. And today, you heard about Redux, right? So very two opposite ends of the spectrum. And this happens very universally, right? People talk about Rust can be used for just about anything.
No, the truth is that, speaking of happening at the conference, everything we just told you, you already heard if you attended the opening talk, because it's basically exactly the same strengths that came up at Microsoft, which makes sense. That's good. That means we know. We have an accurate picture of the things that we really have to take care to preserve in Rust, because that's what people value the most about it?
Of course, there are things that people find difficult, right? And sort of interestingly, these vary a lot more between people than the things that people like.
Yeah, and I have to admit, it's a little embarrassing, but I had started to think that maybe the learning curve is not an issue. I mean, I know all these people who've been successful in Rust. I mean, look, there's all these people here. And I go to Amazon Teams, and I definitely see that virtually anybody who tries to learn Rust succeeds. And like, it's not like you have to be a C++ expert or something. That's just not the case.
Yeah.
So
Rust being easy for Nico, come on now.
yeah, I'd started to let myself think this is not a thing, but I was wrong. Not shockingly. Really, one of the things we saw in the survey data especially, which I found really fascinating, it was Jack who first observed this, how many people talk about coming to Rust, bouncing off, and then coming back, right? It's a really common theme. So it suggests there's definitely still room to go, right, to make Rust more accessible. And my favorite personal quote, which I think gives you a clue, was this one, where he said, I tried it, it was hard, I came back, and it's still hard. And I was like, oh, God, OK. But the point is, for every person who bounces off, comes back, and is happy, there's got to be like 10 more, right, who bounced off and either never came back or didn't try again. So I think we could do better here, no question about that.
It's funny, when we practiced this, he said 2 times the people, now it's 10 times.
There's a lot. That's all I know.
And of course, if you actually dig into some of the technical things that we hear people struggle with, it's not like these are things that we don't know about. So things like lifetimes and borrow checking, pen, async, it's not like we're surprised by these, but it is reassuring to hear that people are encountering the things that we think they are.
Yeah, although some of them, like when I read the quote, the dreaded expected ampersand stir found string, I'm really, we tried to fix that. Like, for the last so many years we've been, anyway. We know they're here. We do need to try to work on fixing them. Be good. The other thing is, though, when people said they came back, another pretty common theme was of people who banged off, bounced off, came back, tried it again. They say how much better it is the second time. And I think a lot of them were especially coming very early in Rust development. And stuff like NLL, all the work we've done on error messages, the other ergonomics initiatives, style improvements. I think it's pretty gratifying to see. Sometimes this feels like an endless battle to sort of make things easier to use. And it's gratifying to see that it really does make a difference. And people show up and appreciate that work when you do it. Right? The other thing is, it leaves, we're not giving you like a full scope of all the quotes, but there definitely have been some ideas that came up that suggest very low-hanging fruit, very easy things we could do to improve. Right? One of them, which I thought was interesting here, was this one, pointing out that because we have a small standard library, that's one of the great things about Rust, means that we've pushed a lot of the experimentation and innovation out into the ecosystem where people are much more creative and all kinds of cool stuff happens. On the other hand, we're really careful. We don't want to sort of put our thumbs on the scale or bless a particular package, so we tend to write our documentation using only the standard library. And then people get confused, right? Like, well, wait a minute. The standard library, the docs say I should use result with boxed in error or something, but everyone uses anyhow. Which is it? Is result with boxed in error the new hotness and no one's evolved over to it? Or is anyhow actually the more modern thing? I don't know, right? So we're kind of hamstringing ourselves in some areas, and I think we have some ideas that came out of this for stuff we could do that would be pretty easy to help avoid that kind of confusion.
Of course, there's also some low-hanging fruit that applies not necessarily in the US and the EU, but around the globe. So, for example, there's a lot of very high-impact things that we can do to empower people across the globe. So, for example, you can provide meetup equipment for very high, good experience remote speaker experiences.
Yeah, I mean, in particular, when you're running a meetup and you don't have, if a lot of the people who you want to have come talk aren't there, of course, they have to be remote, right? And that can sometimes just be a blocker, just having access to a good camera or a good projector or whatever else.
And the other thing is translation, right? So the Rust Espanol folks are translating some of the official standard documentation. And these types of things really enable people across the globe access to these really magnificent documentation. And so better supporting these types of efforts can go a long way.
Yep. The other thing, while we're talking about things that vary, the journey to Rust can be pretty different if you're coming outside. Like if you're from the US and EU, it's one thing. The folks that we talk to who don't come from those areas have a pretty different journey into Rust, right? And one of the main things is the journey to Rust seems often runs through blockchain, which makes sense. There's a ton of blockchain interest in Rust. The interesting part of that is that, let's just say I know that there are some concerns around blockchain for reasons that are good and some not so good. I don't know, lots of reasons. But what ends up happening is people who are coming and trying to work on blockchain have reported asking questions in, say, a Rust forum, saying, I'm trying to use this library, I'm having this problem. And what they end up getting is not advice on how to fix their problem, but advice on why blockchain is a terrible thing, which maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but like it doesn't help them feel welcome in the Rust community, right? And that can be kind of a big turnoff.
Another thing that we see often is that universities really do drive Rust adoption and interest. And this is not as big of a deal in the US and EU, where there's other factors that can also drive adoption and interest. But across the globe, where there aren't these other driving factors, university courses and meetups and things like this actually play a bigger part. Yeah,
that's another. I think this is a really good one to highlight, because it's not like it's unique. It's just that what's unique is how central it is in the conversations we've had from that area.
Yeah. But Nico, hold on. We haven't given any blindingly brilliant insight.
I thought they were pretty good.
Eh.
Okay. You're right. Yeah. We haven't given the blindingly brilliant insight we promised. We've only kind of given you the raw quotes. But for that, whoa, that looks weird here. That's OK. For that, we have some, and I don't know why it's all courtesy of Pete. No, we've done some detailed analysis, right? And this section is kind of a showcase of what we want to do for a number of different domains. And the domain where we've gone the deepest and we've done the most analysis is really safety critical area. And that is the Pete specialist. That's why I put him on the slide. But and we can kind of give you a little bit of an intro, right? I mean, safety critical is a kind of interesting space. Basically, it's software that might get you killed or your friends. So you want it to be right. But it varies, right? It's not really a blanket thing. Some software, like your car radio or something, is not itself dangerous. It's just kind of in the vicinity of things that might get you killed, like your brake systems or whatever, which really are quite important. Right? And so the level of scrutiny that gets applied goes up. And at these highest levels, it's super expensive to develop this kind of software, because you're basically validating, you're going through really detailed processes to show that you've made the best effort you can to find all the kinds of problems. And at this point, the best effort you can is kind of important, right? And this is this quote you see here about what if, say, memory unsafe languages are no longer considered state-of-the-art. What that means is part of doing the best effort you can is using the state-of-the-art tools. Like if you're going to show an assessor that you've made your best effort and you go and handwrite all your code using, I don't know, Commodore 64 assembly or something, they're going to be like, well, you probably could have done something a little better. In the same way, there's a starting to be a push saying, hey, if we can actually use languages like Rust or other automated reasoning tools, maybe that can start to be considered what is state-of-the-art, right? And basically the minimum bar to be satisfactory. And that would be a huge change in the way that this software is developed.
And so Pete did a lot of interviews on this, right? So safety critical is not one big monolith, right? There are different industries that all have a safety critical factor. So automotive, aerospace, industrial, medical. But sort of across the board, Pete found that what people said is that when these industries can use Rust, it allows them to use the same language, not just for sort of prototyping, but go all the way to production with it.
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? Because it's the same themes that we hear other places. Like we talked about versatility, going from low level to high level. That's showing up here. We talked about reliability, letting you iterate faster. The if it compiles, it works. Well, that's what lets these industries move much, much faster if they're able to adopt Rust, right? And the last part is, well, what we're then doing, so that first part is kind of an intro of here's how to understand the space, right? And what are some of the potentials. And the second part is then talking about what are the themes that people said, and what are some quotes that give you a sense for what that theme means to them, right?
Yeah, so after you take those themes, you can actually start to group them into things that, for example, Rust does well today, right? Like being state of the art. And there are some things that Rust can do better and places where if we do better, Rust can be a good candidate for these industries.
Yeah, these are kind of our, the core values that we should not let go of, and the opportunities, right? Where if we can move the needle here, it will really unblock people from being more successful and actually do that thing we set out to do in the beginning of empowering them, right?
And some of this is language, right? Some of the things that we do to make the language better, and some of this is ecosystem, right? Some of this is building crates that these industries can use. And so it's not just the future of the Rust project, it's the future of the Rust language and ecosystem.
Yep. So where are we at? Well, we have to do a few more interviews, like we talked about. And mostly we want to cover, we haven't gotten as many of the folks who don't know Rust that well, or sort of the Rust skeptics. That's the area I'm trying to focus on. So if you know any of those people, who you think might want to talk to us, come find us. Then we're doing that data analysis. Sadly, it does not involve these super cool, like, mega glasses, but that's okay. You have some? Yet, true. And we're working to author an RFC, which will kind of lay out, this is what we've learned, essentially, and some of the recommendations we can make based on that.
Yeah, and we'll probably share these, outside the RFC, right? Blogs, and I don't know, there'll probably be one or two news companies coming and asking, so this is what the next 10 years of Rust is?
Yes, perhaps. This is all part of kind of a larger story of trying to get past the really informal mechanisms we had before of taking input on Zulip and RFC and into something that's more structured, more representative, that will scale to this higher level of Rust adoption, right? So we've been setting up project goals. These are kind of 6-month tactical initiatives. What are we going to do right now? And we were trying to set up flagship goals that are like longer-term trends, but the question then arises, how do you decide what you're going to do? What is worth doing for the next couple years? Well, you need to have the vision doc and these kind of research to inform that question, right, and make those judgments.
Yeah. And so we're finishing up, but we have a couple quotes that sort of capture the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And I really liked this quote from someone I interviewed, which said something to the effect of, if all these things were done, I would be a happy Rust programmer. And if not, I would still be a Rust programmer. And this is really telling, because it really highlights that Rust enables people to do the things that they wouldn't do before. But what we want to do is make this a language that people love to do those things in.
Yep. I liked this one. We each got to pick one. I like this one, which is saying, hey, we have a great community. I think that's true. But in particular, part of what makes it great is that we're here not just because we have like an affection for the language, but because it actually opens up the ability for us to do new stuff. So, cool. That brings us to the end. So give yourselves a round of applause for yourselves, because you are a great community. And I don't know what Nell wants to do now, but.